There are some terrible, terrible albums out there whose awfulness is compromised by containing one great song. Let's get into it, shall we? Welcome classic rock fans to another ranking video, and today we're looking at 10 great songs on terrible, terrible albums. If you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe, and do check that notification bell. And check the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at Classic Album Review. It's always much appreciated. So the first one, number 10 that is, on this list of complete stinkers, is John Lennon's Sometime in New York City from 1972, if I'm not mistaken. And the song is New York City itself. John Lennon has always been known as the kind of intellectual Beatle, and Sometime in New York City was the first time he sacrificed, I think, great musical ideas for political posturing. I think we can pretty much ignore all that avant-garde silliness that we got in the late 60s with the Wedding album and Two Virgins and all that stuff. I mean, at the time, I suppose an album about current affairs seemed like a great idea, and let's not forget McCartney had just had I think he'd released it as a single, if I'm not mistaken, Give Ireland Back to the Irish. And there's even a song on this album called The Luck of the Irish, if my memory serves me right. But I think splitting this disc between Lennon and Yoko Ono songs makes for a challenging listen. But this song is absolutely fabulous. It's Lennon channeling his inner Chuck Berry. But this song is a semi-autobiographical narrative that deals with John and Yoko's move to New York, and could really be seen as a sequel to the Ballad of John and Yoko. Anyway, the album I think is certainly not that great, but this is a wonderful, wonderful track. Number 9 is Van Halen and Fire in the Hole from Van Halen 3. Now, Van Halen have got a wonderful back catalogue, some incredible riffs, but this album did not sit well with fans. It was the first and last album to feature lead vocalist Gary Cherone. AllMusic interestingly described this album as it suffers from the same problem as the Hagar-era Van Halen: limp riffs, weak melodies, and plodding, colourless rhythms. That being said, the song Fire in the Hole has some real testicle to it. Great opening guitar work by Eddie Van Halen. I love the way the drums are introduced, and wonderful, wonderful anthemic chorus. And of course we get that super bluesy inflected voice from Gary Cherone. It's definitely the standout track, a bit of a diamond in a turd really. Number 8 is David Bowie and Blue Jean from the Tonight album. I think it was Rolling Stone or NME that said Bowie has made a bad album, and he knows it. Bowie's greatness is beyond doubt, but even great artists can make not so great albums. And to be honest, there aren't many misses in the David Bowie catalogue, but this is definitely one of them. Described by AllMusic as the weakest album he ever recorded. Well, that's up for debate, I suppose, but nevertheless, I consider it to be a weak album. Instead of breaking away from the stylised pop of Let's Dance, this album clings to the shirt tails of the former, which seems to smack of kind of a lack of ideas, maybe just feeling a bit directionless. But that being said, Blue Jean is a wonderful, wonderful number. It was actually a song that was launched with a 20-minute short film, Jazzing for Blue Jean, directed by Julian Temple, and the song performance in that forms what would become the actual video to promote the number. But this is a song that would feature in Bowie's catalogue for a long time after this album, even featuring as late as the A Reality Tour 2004. Number 7 is Creedence Clearwater Revival, and the song is Someday Never Comes from the Mardi Gras album. Now this is definitely a break-up album, there's no doubt about that. With internal politics reaching ahead and the other band members insisting on more songwriting credits, and John Fogerty insisted that he gave them what they wanted, he allowed them to come up with the goods. Ultimately, playing out the way he wanted it to, really, with a song that becomes a testimony for the songwriting brilliance that is John Fogerty, and the fact that the band was essentially him. I think that seemed to be the implicit message behind the ethos of this album. This band released several albums over their career, I think 6 or 7 albums, defined by that swampy sound and that yowl of John Fogerty. not to mention quite a few nicked Scotty Moore riffs. But I think in allowing Doug Clifford and Stu Cook to write, perform and sing some of these songs, it was almost as if Fogerty was just washing his hands of the whole affair. The only really good song on this album is the aforementioned Someday Never Comes. It starts off quite nicely with some intricate drum work by Doug Clifford and that trilling guitar before we get the accustomed, the trademark yowl from Fogerty in a song which is essentially a narrative, a father and son thing. It's a good song on a dud album. Number 6 is Judas Priest and Turbo Lover from the album Turbo. Judas Priest were never afraid to experiment, I think. But on the other hand, their album Turbo still gets some pretty mixed reviews. There are those strange creatures out there that really like this album. While Iron Maiden's experimentation with synths was quite effective, really, with Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son, although Bruce Dickinson is on camera saying to a fan that synths do not belong in heavy metal. However, Priest goes balls deep, which sounds a bit like a news headline, doesn't it? And then subsequently regretted it, to the point of crossing over into what is a kind of an almost pop metal. And the video was absolutely dreadful. It's like a cross between Mad Max and Frogger. I have to admit, though, this is a standout track on this album. An album that is... there's actually probably a secret society somewhere that really loves this stuff. You know, just old geezers, eyes shrink-wrapped in tears, banging on about shoulder pads and gated drum fills and roomy production and Richard Marx. Maybe in time this album will be hailed as a classic of pop metal fusion, but don't hold your breath. Number 5 is Black Sabbath, Never Say Die, from the album of the same title. As the 70s were coming to an end, this band were clearly struggling, specifically from substance abuse, from cocaine to sparking up the old devil's lettuce. Even in terms of personnel, they couldn't even bear to be in the same room as one another. And, of course, that's not to mention they got their arse handed to them by Van Halen. Needing to bring some fresh impetus or energy from what many to be considered a fairly lukewarm album that was technical ecstasy. This band went on to record what is, in metal circles, considered to be one of the most hated albums of all time, Never Say Die. But despite their descent into the murky abyss of mediocre metal, as well as the aforementioned dalliances with substances that would lead to Ozzy's serious ant snorting habit. But this track is pretty awesome. A bit Thin Lizzy-like, if you ask me. Quite an up-tempo romper. It's got a real classic rock and roll vibe in the 1970s. A great chorus accompanied by some deep, resonant riffing from Tony Iommi. There's an interesting Top of the Pops performance of this one as well. So great song, not so great album. Number 4 is Iron Maiden and the Klansman from Virtual 11. The Blaze Bayley era gets a lot of harsh criticism, despite the fact that the X Factor was a pretty decent album. Poor Blaze, of course, endured the wrath of Iron Maiden fans for not being Bruce. Then later, of course, would endure the indifference of his band for not being Bruce, effectively. But instead of upping their game and producing an album that proved all the naysayers wrong, they put out this complete and utter turd. Instead of a killer album, no pun intended, being dropped, I think it was a bollock that was dropped with this one. And the less said about the Angel and the Gambler, the better. The Klansman, of course, was, I think, inspired by Braveheart, and the idea behind the song was about fighting for freedom and identity. But it's a blistering number, wonderful number, and the band still keep this in their set to this day, which I like the idea of that. It's kind of like paying a tribute to all eras of Iron Maiden, as well as a tribute to Blaze Bayley, who, let's be honest, could not have had it easy. Number 3 is Pink Floyd and The Narrow Way from Ummagumma. This is a prime example of what Gilmour would describe as psychedelic noodling. That being said, the live stuff is pretty good, although I prefer the live stuff that featured on the early years box set. That Man and the Journey tour is just fantastic. But it's the studio material that is absolutely agonising. It's a standout track due to Gilmour's gorgeous phrasing and guitar work. I'm not sure Gilmour would ever contemplate singing it these days. I think the vocal performance operates at the top end of his register then. I don't know if I think he'd struggle with it these days. Not that he'd ever even consider including it in his set, of course. But this is no doubt the saving grace of this album. It's a psychedelic classic. That, and of course perhaps the acoustic English tweeness of Grantchester Meadows. Number 2 is Metallica, The Unnamed Feeling, from the notorious St. Anger album. This band were at a kind of a plateau. I think this band were kind of lost from the Black Album onwards. Many Metallica fans see the Black Album as kind of emblematic, where it all goes wrong for this band. Many see the Black Album as a classic Metallica album where it all reaches its fruition. But nevertheless, that huge success that album drew to the band left them feeling perhaps one foot in two camps, really didn't know who to please. Nevertheless, despite being a huge draw live, of course, and they still are, this album is, many would argue, is actually ruined by the production. A bit like Justice for All, which is another album I struggle to listen to from Metallica, simply because it just doesn't sound very good. They wanted to go for a very modern orientated style, and we all know what the reviews were like. The problem is that wonderful drum sound on this record. That was irony, by the way, I just thought I'd point that out. But The Unnamed Feeling is a pretty awesome song. Great chunky riff with Hetfield singing about Die a Little More, which kind of is how we all felt after listening to this album. And number 1 is the brilliant Queen and David Bowie and Under Pressure, from the album Hot Space. This is a remarkable and poignant number, there's no doubt about that. The songwriting, the production, the construction of it is just sheer genius. And this band did a really fine job of reworking that Vanilla Ice riff, Ice Ice Baby. Under Pressure achieves the perfect symbiosis of Mercury's vocal histrionics, pirouetting away against the restraint of Bowie's phrasing. You know, it's the blending of those two voices that make this song such an interesting mix. And the whole thing builds to an emotional climax, underpinned by the finger clicks and rhythmic bass. But the Queen's Hot Space album, which came out a bit later, I'm afraid just did not go down so well. So there you have it. That's my 10 great songs on terrible albums. And as promised at the beginning of this video, let's have a few dishonourable mentions. I have to mention the song Beyond Beautiful by Aerosmith. It has to be said that the album Just Push Play is still considered one of the worst rock albums out there. But Beyond Beautiful is a real gem that starts off with that wonderful sitar line. The scope of this song is far greater than anything we'd... the vocal performance on this is just remarkable, it really is. It's easily a great song on a not so great record. Another one which I'll probably get into trouble for is Deep Purple's Woman from Tokyo, from the album Who Do We Think We Are. Now, Who Do We Think We Are is not a terrible album in the way Just Push Play is a terrible album, but it's a pretty bad album when you compare it to what Mark II had done up to that point. Anyway, there you are. That's my list of 10 great songs on terrible albums. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you do like, subscribe, and check the notification bell. And other than that, stay well, stay healthy, unlike me at the moment. And more importantly, hope you keep listening.